You recognize this? This is the musical typing window of from GarageBand. And we're basically building one of these, except we're going to add other elements to it. So you can follow along with me if you have Macs open on your computer. Okay, so here I have a list of of the modules we are going to be building today. We're going to produce MIDI Note On and Off Messages upon pressing keys on your computer keyboard. We're going to create attack velocity control. That's going to be our dynamics control. We're going to produce the following MIDI CC messages: modulation, sustain pedal, pitch bend, and we're going to create an octave plus and minus switch. And then we're going to route all of this data to different MIDI channels so that you can have different instruments loaded and access them with just a click of a button. So here we go. I'm going to go to the bottom left corner of my patch, and I'm going to bring it into edit mode by clicking unlock. I'm in edit mode now. Macs can read many types of device microcontrollers. One of the type of microcontrollers it can read is ASCII microcontrollers from your computer keyboard, and the object that reads key presses from ASCII devices is the key object. So I'm going to drag in a blank object. I dragged it in from the palette here, and I'm going to type the word key into the object. Then I'm going to click outside the object, and here we have it. That's our key object. Now we need to hook this up to a number box. So I'm going to go to the top of my palette again and drag in a number box and connect the first outlet from key into the first inlet of the number box. And that's my first module. I'm going to go to the bottom of my patch window, lock my patch to put it in run mode. Now I'm going to press keys on my computer keyboard and watch what happens in this little number box. Okay. It's telling me what number each key corresponds to. I want your synth to be as functional as the GarageBand synth. So I need to see what keys we're going to use as triggers for MIDI Note On Messages. So I'm going to take us back to our GarageBand musical typing window. All right, I'm going to use this as a template for my own musical typing app. All right, so I'm just writing down all the triggers that I need to recreate this app. Okay, L, semicolon, and I think that is a parentheses, Z, X, C, B. All right, and let me write down what they're using that for. Z is used as the minus switch, X is used as the plus octave switch. And we got to find out the numbers that correspond to all the keys we just wrote down. Okay, A is 97, S is 115. You're going to want to do this so you won't have to do it later. D is 100. We need all these numbers before we can create our triggers. F is 102. G is 103. And H is 1. All right, so now we have all the numbers of all the keys that we're going to use to trigger MIDI Note On and Note Off messages. So we have to create the Note On triggers, and for that we're going to need an object called select. And the arguments in select, the list of numbers that we will use as triggers for our MIDI Note On and Note Off. Parentheses, we'll start with those. So we have 97, 115, 100, 102, 103, 104, 106, 107, 108, 59, and 39. Just there we have it. Okay. So now what we're going to do is connect the output of our number box into our select. All right. These are our triggers. All right. Just so that you can visualize the keys on your keyboard as being triggers in Macs, you can bring in these button objects. They used to be called bang objects. If you want to see your triggers working. Now, if your patch gets really complicated, this could introduce lag into your patch, but just to show you how they work, I'm going to set up a few. All right, I'm pressing A, S, D, F. All right, so you can see that these triggers are working. I'm going to disconnect these buttons from my select triggers because we don't actually need them. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do with these is create MIDI Note On Messages with these triggers. Now, our computer keyboard is not a MIDI device. It doesn't create MIDI messages. We need an object that'll help us create MIDI Note On and Note Off messages from scratch. And that object is called the Make Note object. All right. We're going to give Make Note 2 arguments. We're going to give it a default attack velocity. I'm going to max it out at 127. And we're going to give our notes a default duration. Let's say 500 milliseconds. Everything in Max works in milliseconds. Our device will have duration control. Right now, we're just creating MIDI Note On messages, and the duration control is here in the Make Note object. After 500 milliseconds, Make Note will send our note an automatic Note Off message. We will create a module though that will help us have duration control, whereas when we Note Off messages will be sent when we lift our finger from a key. But for now, we're going to keep it simple and allow Max to send automatic Note Off messages for us. Okay, so I'm going to create messages for a Make Note object. We're going to send this MIDI note number. We're only going to use the triggers that are dedicated to creating MIDI Note On and Off messages. So 97 is our A. And our GarageBand app uses the letter A to create a C. I'm going to start us off in the middle of the keyboard. I'm going to call that middle C. Middle C is MIDI Note 60. So I'm going to bring in a message and type in 60. Connect that to Make Note, and then connect that to the output of the select that corresponds to number 97, to my A key. And there you have it. W is my C sharp, and so that'll be MIDI pitch 61. MIDI note number 61. Let's find W. W is 119. So let's find that here. Here it is, 119. If you hover over the output, it'll tell you what number corresponds to that output. It doesn't line up, so you really do have to check here on the object. Okay, now we want Max to talk to the built-in sound synthesizer, my computer sound card. So we're going to bring in a note out object. And note out has the following inputs. It takes in MIDI note number, and it takes attack velocity. The outputs of Make Note correspond to that. So the first is MIDI note number and pitch, and the second is attack velocity. We are going to use the third inlet of note out later when we want to route the MIDI information to a different channel. Right now, it defaults on channel 1. That's what we're going to use. Let me lock my patch, double click on note out to make sure that it's reading the synthesizer in my sound card, and it is. All right, let's hear this. Right now, the Note Off messages are being sent automatically by this Make Note object. This first argument is default attack velocity, and the second argument is the duration of the note. So what we want to do now is give the performer control over duration of the note by having the Note Off messages sent by the lifting of a key rather than automatically by Make Note. So we have to modify this module and a little bit to make that possible. So what I'm going to do now is, all right, I am going to insert an object between Make Note and Note Out called Strip Note. And what Strip Note does, it stops the Note Off messages from Make Note. All right. Okay. Pitch, velocity, pitch, velocity. Now, before we attempt to play any notes, now we need another module to create our Note Off messages upon the lifting of a key. If we don't make this module before playing another note, we're going to get MIDI loops that are that'll eventually crash our little app. So this is what I want to do. I want to copy that module, edit, paste. And here, I'm going to change this key object into a key up object, and that's going to report when keys that I press are lifted, and we're going to use those triggers to create note off messages. And you probably guessed how we're going to do that. We're going to create a make note object that will send a velocity of 0. And that's your note off message. And then we send that into our note out. Now, just to be double sure, I'm going to remove the default duration from my first make note. Okay, now I think it's safe to create MIDI Note On Messages, because upon key lift, we should also be creating MIDI Note Off Messages. Here we go. Here we go. I'm pressing A. Down, up, down, up, A and D. Down, up. All right, we got duration control. And we don't got any hanging notes because we've successfully created MIDI Note Off Messages. That was easy. All right, the next thing we're going to do is create an attack velocity control. Now, we've already decided on what triggers we're going to use for attack velocity control. Let's take a look at our GarageBand keyboard, or our GarageBand musical typing thing. We're going to program a velocity control that will give us the level control akin to what's available on a harpsichord. Harpsichord has 2 manuals, and one keyboard plays loud sounds, and the second keyboard plays soft sounds. So with these velocity switches, these plus and minus velocity switches, we're going to give us at least that level of control. In the GarageBand musical typing window, C is dedicated to minus attack velocity, and V is dedicated to plus attack velocity. We've already set up those triggers in our max patch, and what I'm going to do now is show you how to create a simple module that will help you to select attack velocity as you play. We're going to use the key triggers created by the letter C and V, but we're also going to use the key up triggers from C and V as well for this attack velocity changing module. Now, let's look at our make note. This make note that creates our MIDI Note On Messages has an argument with a default attack velocity. We can change that default by feeding numbers into the second input of make note. I'm going to use a slider to feed numbers into the middle input of make note. All right, so here I can, by clicking on the slider, change the default attack velocity in make note. Right now it's 95. Let's hear what that sounds like. All right. Let's hear 29. Much softer. Now, upon opening your patch, this slider will be set all the way down to 0. So when I open this patch, I want it to automatically be set to the attack velocity in my make note. So just to make sure that that happens, I'm going to give our patch a load bang. This will send out a bang message upon the opening of the patch. And I'm going to have this load bang trigger a message 127. And that's going to feed straight into my make note. Now let's build a module that'll help us slide up and down this slider that we have controlling attack velocity. Okay, we're going to need our C and V triggers in our Note On module, and the C and V triggers in our Note Off module. All right, so what I'm going to do is bring in 2 button objects. These used to be called bangs, by the way. So if I call them bangs, that's why I'm just used to calling them bangs. And we're going to set up 2 in our Note Off module as well. Let's find trigger 99, which is our C key in our select list. Okay, there's trigger 99. That's our velocity down switch, minus velocity switch. Okay, and there's 118. That's our plus velocity switch. And we're going to do the same thing for our Note Off side. Okay. All right. I'm going to use a counter object to scrub through this MIDI slider here that's controlling our attack velocity. And we're going to use these bangs, these triggers, to control the counter object. So I'm going to go to my object palette, oops, and bring in a counter object. This object counts numbers between a range that you set in its argument here. So I'm going to give this the full value, all the steps that are available in this slider, 0 to 127. And then I'm going to set up a number box with it so that we can see its output. All right. Now, counter, oops. It counts the number of bangs it receives. Now, we could, if we want to keep things ultra simple, we can just have our plus velocity attached to our counter, and our minus velocity, we can send this a message to make it count down for our minus velocity, but that would make working with our plus and minus buttons very tedious. So I'm going to instead, rather than have direct, communication between a direct trigger from our C or V bangs into the counter, I'm going to use a metronome to regulate the count. So I'm going to bring in a metronome object, which will help us scrub through this slider in a way that's faster, and it'll make our app easier to use. So metro, everything in Max in regards to timing is done in milliseconds. I'm going to give this 70 milliseconds. All right. Our metronome is going to trigger our bangs for us. All right. Metronome needs an on and off switch. So we're going to I brought in this toggle from my object palette. Now I'm going to need to give this on and off messages, 0 for off, and 1 for on. There we go. Okay. And so it's our metronome that's going to scrub through our slider. Now you notice this is only going in one direction, up. So we have to, apart from using our triggers to turn the metronome on and off, we're going to use our triggers to tell counter to count up or down. Okay, so counter needs, the 0 means count up, and that information goes into the second inlet of counter. The second inlet of counter is dedicated to what mode of counting you want, up, down, or up, down. So 0 is, as it says here in this little bubble, up. 1 is down. And I'm going to have, let's see, I'm going to have our V trigger a count up, and our C trigger our count down. All right, but we also need these very same triggers to turn our metronomes on and off, our metronome on and off. Actually, let's use our key up to trigger our metronome off. All right, information in sequence, so the Max doesn't get stuck. So since we're going to use these, we could send these very same triggers into the 1, but then there might be confusion as to, okay, do I trigger this first or do I trigger this first? Let's use delay objects to take the guesswork out of it. So delay 50 milliseconds. And these will send out a bang after 50 milliseconds of the initial bang. And so we're going to send these both into our 1 message. All right, let's see how this works. Let's minus velocity. Hey, that's not minus velocity. Oh, I think I got them backwards. C is supposed to be minus and V is supposed to be plus, and I have them reversed. Let me find out why. Oh, it's because 1 is minus velocity and 0 is plus velocity. I had it reversed. All right. This should go down, and it does. Now it's going to go up. Yay. Now, let's hear our notes. Minus. I'm even thinking, let's make that count faster. How about Metro 50? Let's see how well that works. All right, plus, minus. It's a little bit faster. let's think about the opening of the patch again. When we open up this patch, all right, this slider will be set all the way down, but our default velocity will be 127. So any changes that we make to the velocity, you're going to see a jump happen with the slider. And if you're not paying attention, if you don't, you might land on a velocity that you don't want. So I'm going to make sure that this counter, upon the opening of the patch, will be counting from starting from 127. Right? And so our load bang is already sending 127 into here. We can send, you know what, we could also send 127 into our slider. Let's just also give this a count. Whenever you put $1 into a message, that means that you can feed any number into this message from anywhere else in your patch. You're allowing that message to be variable. All right, and so I'm going to click. Now everything is set default. All right. Now, only one way to test this. I'm going to close out of my patch and then open it again. First, let me save work. Okay, I closed and reopened my patch, and as you could see, my load bang sent this 127 message into make note, into the slider, which you see is all the way up, and into counter. And so when we mess with our velocity settings, we shouldn't see a jump happen. So I'm going to decrease. Perfect. It's nice and smooth. And then our plus velocity, let's take it up. Nice. Take a look. So now we have attack velocity control. Now we have to produce the following MIDI CC messages: modulation and sustain pedal and pitch bends. After that, we're going to create an octave plus and minus switch. And then we're going to route all that MIDI information using our MIDI channels so that we have the ability to control multiple instruments in one patch. So stay tuned for that part of the tutorial.